Okay. Welcome, everyone. Welcome, Councillor Dean. And I guess now I have to start mentioning other people that aren't on the committee, but I just happened to look up and I saw you. This is a public meeting to consider the proposed comprehensive official plan and zoning bylaw amendments listed as items 1 to 4 on today's agenda. For the items just mentioned, only those who make oral submissions today or written submissions before the amendments are adopted may appeal the matter to the Ontario Municipal Board / Local Planning Appeal Tribunal. In addition, the applicant may appeal the matter to the Ontario Municipal Board / Local Planning Appeal Tribunal if Council does not adopt an amendment within 120 days of receipt of the application for zoning and 180 days for an official plan amendment. A comment sheet is available over there by that door for anyone wishing to submit written comments on these amendments or if anyone wants to speak to them. So, are there any declarations of interest? No? A confirmation of minutes from the February 27th, 2018 meeting. Boy, that seems like a long time ago in our world, doesn't it? Like we're slackers or something. It's carried? Okay, so the first item is South Nepean Town Centre Community Design Plan, which is, even the title, I just want to tell you that the title for this has caused some people to ask me whether they should come out and speak to it. Because they were thinking it was the whole South Nepean Town Centre, which it's not. It's just a piece of it. It's not an insignificant piece of it. It's a Minto application, but it's in the south of the larger South Nepean Town Centre. So, and it is a Minto application. It's official plan and zoning bylaw amendment, 3311 Greenbank Road and 3380 Jockville Road, which is the old Gamble Farm. We have some of the property there. The city does. And then it's the area around St. Joseph High School. So Sue Murphy's here, and I do have a motion that Councillor Tierney is going to be moving. Do you want to just put that on the floor now?
Sure. Thank you, Madam Chair. Whereas there's no designated off-leash dog park in Ward 3, Barrhaven, whereas there's been no significant interest from the community for an off-leash dog park, therefore be resolved that Planning Committee recommend to Council approve the detailed design of the park portion at 2393 Longsfields Drive, located along the Jockville River. Will include the designated area for off-leash dogs allowed park.
So it's a pretty simple motion. We have like 90,000 people in Barrhaven. We don't have one dog park, even within a park. So this is a great opportunity. It's along the Jock River, and it's going to be very much a people place in that. So we're not saying all of it should be that. We're just making sure that when it gets to do when the park planner's looking at it with the Mintos, that they're looking at it with the mindset of having a dog component to it. Sue, where are you? Did you need to speak to this item? Does anyone have any questions at all? So you're good not to speak. Is this item, so is the motion carried on the dog park? Carried. And on the item as amendment? Carried. Did you say woof? Oh, woof. Good. That's cute. That's cute in dog language. Okay, next one is zoning bylaw amendment, part of 1211 Old Montreal Road. This is in the Cardinal Creek area, Councillor Blaze area. Kind of like back-to-back townhouses where it's a zoning bylaw amendment. We don't have any speaker. We do have a speaker. Oh, Michelle. Does anyone have any questions on this item? And you don't need to speak if they're prepared to carry it. So is it carried? Thank you. Thanks for coming out, Michelle. Next up is 3015, 3055, 3075, and 3095 Palladium Drive. It's a zoning bylaw amendment. Paul Black from FOTEN is here if anyone has any questions on this. Does anyone have any questions? Paul? Do you need to speak if... No? Thank you. So on the item, is it carried? Okay, the next one, Councillor McKenney was here, and is she still here? Yep. Oh, there you are. A zoning bylaw amendment, 207 Bell Street North. It's in Somerset Ward, and the councillor has provided a lot of detail and comments, but you're here in case there's anyone has any issues. So does anyone need to ask any questions, or is this item carried? Is it carried? Carried. Thank you. Thank you. Oh, Brian, you were You didn't, for the record, you didn't need. See, okay, do I have one? Do I have? Your sheet. Okay. Okay. So the next one we're holding, it's 195 Meandering Brook Drive, which is why Councillor Deans is here. And we have speaker-wise, we have Valecraft Homes representatives here. And then item number 6 is the application to alter the former Grant School 2720 Richmond Road, a property designated under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act. I have no speakers. Does anyone have any questions? Is this item carried? Thank you. And I mean that. Thank you very much. This has been a long time. I think about the same time as the Bayview School, actually. If I recall, that's when Councillor Cullen was on a little bit of a buying tour. Oh, the memories. Item number 7 is the 2017 annual, sometimes if you're beaten up badly enough, it just goes, 2017 annual report pursuant to the Building Code Act. And Mr. Bedin is here. He's here if anyone has any questions, or are we just going to receive that? Received? Thank you. And then number 8 is the appointments to the Planning Advisory Committee. As you know, the province mandated everyone to have a Planning Advisory Committee. So we had a process. We followed it. These are the recommendations coming forward. And there's also going to be a motion to move this, if you accept it, to council tomorrow so we can get going, because the term is only for this year, with this year being, as a reminder, till November 30th, 2018. So, is the Planning Advisory Committee carried? And we have, and the motion?
I think you summed up in a nutshell, Madam Chair. Therefore, it be resolved that the Planning Committee recommend Council suspend the notice required under subsection 29, 3, and 34.1 of the Procedures Bylaw 2016-377 to consider the report at its meeting on the 28th of March 2018 to allow prompt scheduling of PAC members for orientation and the inaugural PAC meeting within the second quarter of 2018.
Is that carried? Thank you. Okay, then the last item is the Development Charge Bylaw Review Councillor Sponsor Group, and Mr. Willis, our General Manager, is keen to get going on this very important work. And so we have a recommendation which shouldn't surprise anyone with the membership, and if you're okay with it, I'm going to ask you to carry that. Is it carry? Thank you. Does this need to go to council? Yes. It needs to go to council?
Sorry, Madam Chair, can you repeat the question?
Does the Development Charge Bylaw Review Councillor Sponsor Group need to go to council?
Yes, I believe it does, Chair.
Okay, so let's have a motion, Vice Chair Tierney, to move that to council tomorrow as well. Okay, Carrie? Thank you. All right, so we'll go back to Meandering Brook, the site plan approval. The planner is Simon Diaco. I always have to ask. I don't know. For some reason, I feel like there's an L in there or something. Yeah. So before us, we have Simon and we have John Herwire. We're not doing a presentation. That's good. Thanks. Colin, thank you for coming forward. Phil, did you want to come up as well? Just in case we need you. We don't have, the only speakers we have are Danny Page, Jean-Guy Rivard from in Vailcraft Homes. So, yeah, but I'm talking about speakers. All right, so Simon, do you want to just give us a brief overview here?
Thank you, Madam Chair. We're here today to consider an application for site plan control where delegated authority was removed and it has risen to Planning Committee for consideration. Just some history into this file. In 2011, a rezoning application was brought forward to Planning Committee. At that time, the recommendation included a clause that the zoning bylaw not be enacted until the site plan was resolved. At that time, the site plan was considering a mixed-use project of 269 units. Vailcraft was the proponent, and they still are. During in the time between 2011 and today, the site plan has undergone various revisions. There's actually been quite a reduce in the amount of units from 269 to 156 units. Project is a mix of townhomes and stacked apartments. Sorry, I apologize for the images here. I'm going to just jump back to here. The project fronts onto Leicester Road, and what we're looking at now is a right-in and right-out only access on a new easterly access along Leicester Road. The existing intersection at Leicester and Meandering Brook, which is the subject to a lot of comments, as you see it today, looking west and now looking south, is to remain. The draft report was prepared, and as I mentioned, the board councillor has not provided concurrence and been risen to Planning Committee for consideration. So we're basically here to discuss this file and the site plan conditions that we're recommending that are attached in the report. So myself, Phil Landry, Don Herwire, and Colin Simpson are here to answer any questions you may have on the site plan control application. If this application is approved, we would then enact the bylaw for the zoning bylaw amendment and would go through its normal appeal period.
Okay, thank you. So I think that we'll have the applicant come up first and then ask questions. Okay. So come on up, Danny. Yeah. Welcome back.
Thank you. Nice to be back. Would you like me to just do a little overview as to where we stand on this?
Yes, that would be good.
All right,
and you have 5 minutes.
Okay. For those of you who may not know me, my name is Danny Page, and I'm with Vailcraft Homes. And I'm here before you today to ask for your assistance in approving our site plan application in accordance with the recommendation provided by staff. This application was first submitted in 2010, and since that time we've been working with the city to address every conceivable technical concern, and we think that we happen to have accomplished this. The one issue that we cannot seem to move beyond is the desire for traffic signals at the intersection of Meandering Brook Drive and Leicester Road. And these sites are not a technical requirement, and notwithstanding that technical requirement, we've heard that Councillor Deans would like us to install traffic lights here, despite the evidence and the legislative framework not allowing for that. And in essence, I guess what this translates to is that we're being asked to provide a traffic light and the associated intersection improvements at a cost of about $1 million as a gift. Over the course of this project, we have attended a number of public meetings. I think we've attended 4 of them to date. We have heard concerns of the public. We understand that they have concerns about traffic. We have heard that they've had concerns about density and spillover of parking from within our site onto the streets. We've attempted to address those concerns. We've made some very significant concessions in reducing the size and the scale of our development. We started off with 270 units. which is entirely consistent with what Canada Lands Company was proposing on these lands when they had done the subdivision. And that 270 units has been reduced to 156 units. In addition to that, what we've done is we've added an entrance onto Lester Road. We went out and got the approvals from the NCC and from Canada Lands in order to introduce the entrance on Lester Road. We have been attempting to make the site work and mitigate the traffic impacts. Now, we appreciate that there's been significant concern over safety and the need for traffic signals. We have retained traffic consultants to look at this. They've done traffic studies not once but on several different occasions. They have run the numbers. They have run the city's numbers. There have been instances where our numbers have been questioned. We've run the city's numbers, and the bottom line is that warrants are not met on this particular intersection. I think the staff report indicates that the warrants are presently at, when you factor in our site, it works out to 67% warrants. I think earlier in September, I think we had generated a warrant analysis of 68%. We're always consistently in that ballpark. Warrants are simply not met. We've also asked our traffic engineers to look at the safety issue, and they've concluded that the intersection works properly, that there isn't a safety issue. They've reviewed the accident history. This intersection is operating as it was anticipated in the original subdivision. Our traffic, and so I think it's also worth noting that over the course of the 8 years we've had our application in the hopper with the city, 8 years, our application goes back to 2010, and throughout those 8 years, the city has had a number of opportunities to look at this intersection and institute changes, and they have elected not to. And along those lines, I want to stress that the speed limit has not been altered along Lester Road. It continues to remain at 80 kilometers. No traffic lights have been installed. No stop signs have been installed on Lester Road. In 2016, the city completed the Airport Parkway and Lester Road widening environmental assessment. The option of widening Lester Road and introducing traffic lights was pushed back another 10 years. So rather than precipitate it, it was actually deferred for 10 years. In 2017, when the city was working on the development charge bylaw to incorporate new traffic intersections or traffic light intersections, this intersection did not make the list. And more recently, last summer, Lester Road was repaved. There were absolutely no reconfigurations to this intersection. So I submit to you that there have been opportunities for the city to institute changes here, and the city has elected not to, and that seems to support the proposition that there isn't a safety concern at this intersection.
Okay, so is that the 5 minutes? That's the 5 minutes.
Could I close and simply say we proceeded in good faith with our application over the course of the last 8 years.
Okay.
We respected the city's rules.
Okay, that's it.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so I have some people, are all of you that have identified have questions of Mr. Page? Okay, so while you're asking those questions, I have a question of staff. If you agree that it's 67 or 68%, I'd like you to give me a ballpark of, in our city, across our city, how many people are waiting for a traffic light situation that are higher than that. So if it's like 10 or is it 100? Okay. Councillor Blais, you have a deferral motion or something? Amendment?
Well, it's on behalf of Councillor Dean, so I'll gladly let her read it out and explain the reasons behind it. But Mr. Page, just to contextualize a little bit, the left-hand corner as you enter the neighborhood, and then I'm looking on kind of like the overhead key plan, there's a triangular parcel that's undeveloped. Is that looks like it might be a drainage area or some kind of natural protection. Is that to remain undeveloped?
Yes, so I'm not sure, are we talking about the one that's colored yellow, or are we talking about the one...
The triangular piece at the bottom along Lester Road, that's treed.
That's actually owned by the city. It was conveyed as part of the subdivision and as part of the Sawmill Creek lands.
And so the plan is to widen Lester Road at some time in the future to four lanes?
Yes, and you can actually see along the north side of Lester Road, you can see a double line there. It's relatively...
Yeah,
but
yeah, you got a left turning lane there.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and on the south side of Lester Road, are those lands capable of being developed? They're within the urban boundary. They're designated for.
They're part of the green belt.
They're part of the green belt.
That's correct.
Okay, so there'll be no housing development on the south side of the road.
That's correct.
Okay, so I have some concerns. I have a lot of intersections like this in Orleans. You know, Lester Road is, except for the fact that there's no development, it's reminding me a lot of Brian Coburn Boulevard, where we built the first 2 lanes of a future 4-lane. We built the neighborhood on the north side, and then we're asking people to cross both sides of the street to get to transit. And in rush hour, Brian Coburn's only 60, and people can't do it during rush hour. Lester's an 80. Asking people to basically jaywalk 3 lanes of traffic because you've got a left turn lane there on an 80-kilometer road during rush hour just seems to me pretty silly. So I guess my question to Mr. Page is, if this intersection were to be included in the DC background study, which we've just formed a committee to look at and update for next year, if this intersection was included in the DC background study, would Vailcraft be open to the idea of front-ending intersection modifications, whether that's a traffic light or a roundabout, whatever the best option is for the community, front-end those modifications, and then obviously be paid back by the city per the DC bylaw that would be updated?
I would be remiss if I didn't say that we would be prepared to look at it. And when I say looking at it, that would involve having a more fulsome understanding as to just what sort of intersection improvements were being expected of us.
Sure.
And the reason that I say that is that when we were looking at this some years ago, we thought we had a good handle on what those intersection improvements were, but by the time we got through discussions with staff, those costs had more than doubled. It became evident that a median was going to be expected. The median drove the need to widen on the south side. The south side meant that we had to move hydro poles. Moving hydro poles added to the cost, and suddenly the project, even in 2011, ballooned to somewhere in the order of about $900,000. Sure. So I need to know more fully what that involves. And then secondly, I need to know when it would rank on the development charge bylaw so that we know when we would be reimbursed.
100%.
Yeah. Having said that, my gut reaction, though, is our project brings this to 67%,
sure,
and it does not meet warrants.
Sure, but in eyeballing it, if that's a 4-lane cross-section, the amount of land that the city owns, don't know about the NCC, you can certainly fit a roundabout in there, a 2-lane roundabout in there as an interim measure, which actually may prolong the capacity of the 2-lane cross-section, as we know in Brian Coburn, and then delay the need for widening by 5 or 10 years, therefore saving costs over the long run. So I would support deferral of 1 meeting for staff and the applicant and traffic and Councillor Deans to go out and work on a solution. And in my view, nothing focuses the mind and creativity like a deadline. And you got 2 weeks to figure out how to make it work. And I think this could easily be added to the DC background study through the working group that's going to happen next year.
And it wouldn't concern you about any queue jumping of all the other projects, that they're going to give us an idea of how many there are?
Why would it queue jump? If they're going to front end
at the next planning meeting, we're going to have an item from Councillor Wilkinson, which is actually meets all of the targets.
Sure.
What is it? Almost. What's the address of that one? Pardon? Huntsville and Terry Fox. Okay. Which has been a problem that's exacerbated by the closing of the Goulburn Side Road, which is causing real problems, okay? And through that process of understanding that, which we're not going to likely be able to do either, we've got people that have built Cambrian, have widened Cambrian Road and other roads that are waiting till 2022 to get paid back.
Sure.
So that has to be part of the conversation of whether Vailcraft, when you have a situation where there isn't any warrants achieved even close to them, that they're going to be sitting waiting for till 2025 maybe. With the Bank Street front ending that we did recently for Councillor Kakish and Councillor DeRuse, that payback I think is 2024 on Bank Street, and it met everything. So, okay, so you now have put that on the floor. The motion is to therefore be resolved the Planning Committee defer the vote on 195 Meandering Brook Drive until the April 24th meeting and direct planning staff to work with the developer during that time to explore any and all options to find solutions to the traffic and transit problems outlined above. And outlined above were, I think you spoke to those, or did you want to go into more detail?
Well, it's Councillor Dean's neighborhood. She knows the neighborhood better than I do.
All right, so Councillor Deans, you're next, and then Councillor Brockington, and then Councillor Cloutier.
Thank you, and thank you, Mr. Page, for being here. And let me just first say that I've worked with Vailcraft many times over the years, and I think they're really a solid development company, and they've been great to work with. So it's not personal, it's about the safety and developing a good planned community. And I think the one part of the story, Mr. Page, that perhaps you forgot to tell Planning Committee is back in 2010, during the original application, the warrant, with similar numbers to the traffic volumes today, was at 89% without the proposed 270 additional units. And so with that in mind, Vailcraft stood at public meetings in front of the community and promised to put a light in at that intersection, and so created an expectation in this community 8 years ago that that light would come. And I guess I found it a little strange to hear you say today that the city staff chose not to address concerns when the city staff had every expectation that Vailcraft, in moving forward with this development, would actually be putting in the light, because that was the promise made. So maybe I'd just like to comment on that.
And then I'll want staff to comment on it.
Sure, I'd be glad to. So back in 2001, when we had, or 2010, when we had a very different proposal with 270 units and a single entrance, warrants were in the range of about 87%. We agreed that we would look into it, and we certainly were at that time prepared to proceed based on the cost estimates that we had and the design that we had done. As we attempted to work towards the road modification agreement with the city, the costs ballooned. I had made some reference to having to install a median. I had made some reference to having to move the utility lines, and we went from a cost of $450,000 to $850,000. That became unviable from a financial perspective. And then at that time, we then entered, I guess, a change in the marketplace. And when I say a change in the marketplace, what happened was the condominium apartment market went incredibly soft. And we found ourselves in a situation where we would have to anticipate a much longer build-out period on the site, and in addition to that, some extraordinary costs that weren't even warranted. And as a result of that, we could not proceed with that project in its current form. We had to go back to the drawing board and figure out some other way to make this work. And that's what we've done. And part of the reason that we've gone back is we wanted to find a way to lower the density, still within the framework of the zoning bylaw. We wanted to try and appease a lot of the concerns that came from the community. And this does work considerably better. Instead of 87% warrants, it's only 67% warrants. We are attempting to make this work, and we've shown a lot of good faith along the way. And it's been an 8-year process. We've incurred tremendous expenses going back and redesigning and trying to rework this.
So just on this warrant issue, because I think it's important, in 2010, the warrant was 89% current condition. It wasn't including the 270 units. So I guess the other question is, how does a warrant with the wording here, similar volumes, so it has similar volumes to the volumes it had in 2010. How does that warrant drop from 89 to 46?
Madam Chair, staff have counted the intersection a number of times since 2010, 4 times in 2014, twice in 2016, and once in 2018. So the volumes are notably less than what they were in 2010. In 2010, we were using student counters. Since 2011 and onward, we've been using the MyoVision cameras, and that has shown to be more accurate, and the volumes are notably reduced compared to the 4 following counts compared to the 2010 count.
So the students were like 50% wrong?
That could be one explanation. There could be a collision in the area or other detours that were happening in that day in 2010.
Does that call into question a lot of our other traffic control signals across the city if we used to use student counters? And
through you, Madam Chair. So, I mean, I think back in 2010 when the count was done, it was 89%. Again, I'm not sure what happened that day. It's strange that you would go from 89% down to 50%. So it tells me either there was an event that went on that forced traffic to use that road, either because of an accident or we had a bad count, so those are the kind of things we do, because normally when we have intersections that are in the even 70s or 80s, they tend to stay there. And with time, because of growth, they increase. The challenge with the warrants is it's not usually the main street, so in this case Leicester, it's usually the side street that creates the demand. You need at least 75 vehicles per hour for 8 hours to approach the intersection from the side street. The count that we did this past winter, and I think it was January or February, we had 15 cars in the peak period. The average was about 12 or 13.
How many did you say? Did you say 15 or 50?
15 vehicles exiting. So, and I think looking at the whole area, there are other access points to get out of the community. So I think people realize that depending on where they're going, they may take the northerly sections to get out through the community. So the numbers have been consistent since 2011 in the 50 to 60 range. The one we did in 2018 was 46%. And so, again, that's consistent with what we would expect for this type of road, and the fact that this isn't the only road to get out of that community.
yeah, well, it's the main road. The other one's very circuitous route out, and what you're reflecting is certainly not what the people that live there are reflecting at all. So I don't know where the breakdown is, but it just seems odd to me that 89 to 46 doesn't really make sense. But those are all my questions to the proponent. I do have other questions to staff when we get there.
Okay, so again, going with the questions of Danny, the next up is Councillor Brockington of the applicant.
Just to the applicant, but I do have some for staff.
And then Councillor Clucci and Councillor Tierney.
Mr. Page, you indicated the original plan was 270 units. You're down to 156. I didn't understand why. Why have you reduced by so much?
My apologies. So in essence, what we've done is we've converted many of the buildings into townhomes, and so instead of having stacked townhomes, we have townhomes, and that reduces the total number of units. And we did so for two reasons. Number one, in order to reduce the total number of dwelling units on the site so that it would mitigate the traffic concerns. And then secondly, we thought it was a more appropriate response to the current market conditions. And I mentioned a little earlier that the condominium apartment market, particularly in suburban areas, had gone particularly soft for a number of years. And we just felt that it was important to try and reposition ourselves in order to help build out the site a little bit more quickly.
Can you tell me which modifications at this intersection your company would be prepared to contribute to? I mean, I don't know if traffic lights is the right option. We've heard, a roundabout or other modifications. I'm sure that will come out after the 1 month meeting, but Leicester is a fast road. It is going to be widened. There will be more traffic. People need to get across the other side if there's going to be bus transportation. There has to be a realization that
that there will be and there are safety issues. So what are you prepared as a minimum?
I think
guess
you've answered that.
We've had a number of discussions about a number of different options, starting in terms of the more affordable options. We've heard discussions about stop signs as being an option. We've also had discussions about lowering the speed limits along Lester Road. Neither of those has been pursued, and those are relatively simple measures that would improve, I guess, visibility and the use of that intersection. And the city has opted not to exercise those. We've been at this for 8 years trying to get our site plan approved. We meet all of the standards that we are required to meet. We at one point in time were prepared to make a pretty significant contribution, but with the elapsement of time, we've eaten into any kind of profit margins on this site. We're desperately trying to keep afloat, under the circumstances.
That's what I find bizarre, because there's an opportunity cost. Each year you don't do something, you're giving up what you could be realizing.
Absolutely.
And I don't know, but at some point I'm thinking, well, maybe I just cave in and finance the lights, because then our project can get going, and we don't keep paying property tax on undeveloped land and all this stuff. But anyway, I support what's being proposed here. I think within a month you can come to some sort of outcome,
When there's no warrant.
because I'm not prepared to support the site plan at this point.
Okay, after 8 years. So just so you know that we're not legally allowed to expect them to pay for that when there is no warrants. So you all can put that in perspective. Also, I want to tell you that Gary Baker is somewhere here in the room. There you are, Gary, in case we have questions, which we are going to want to talk to him about development charges. And just so you know, because we are going to start the development charge process, that staff want to add more than 60 more intersections to the new DC bylaw at a cost of at least $850,000 each. And in the West End, Councillor Cadre, Councillor Hubley, in Derek Moody's area, 35 alone there. All of them, I presume, must meet the warrants. Which one of you guys is going to respond to that? Just so we can have a reality check before we continue with the question.
Madam Chair, at this point, they're just areas of concern, and we're not going through the warrant analysis at this point. That would come out later as we get closer to implementation.
Pardon me?
The list wouldn't be based on warrants at this point. It would be just where growth is happening, where we'd want to focus our attention and do the warrant analysis as we get closer to implementation.
Where growth is happening.
Correct.
So over the 8 years, they've gone from 270 units to 156 units. It's on the affordability factor that you're all talking about. So next up on questions to Mr. Page is Councillor Cloutier. Then we go to staff, and we have Vice Chair Tierney, Blais, and Deans. And Leeper. So, Councillor Cloutier to the applicant.
Yes, thank you. And others have asked some of the questions. Does Vailcraft, Mr. Page, thank you for your presentation. Does Vailcraft, or to your knowledge, other developers intend to make any other development applications for this area that you know of? You went from 269 to 156. Do you have any plans to add to that in the future?
Within this area, we are afraid to do any other development applications within this area. All right. The reality is these are the last of our lands that we have within this area, and we don't anticipate purchasing more within this area.
Okay. Thank you.
I have a question. Says Councillor Blais had mentioned a 2-week delay. But in the motion written by Councillor Deans, it says the 24th, which is a month. So that can go to April 10th then, the next meeting?
I just picked April 20. I picked April 24th because I wanted to give enough time for this process to work. I would be happy for it to come back on. Well, by the way, that was not the city's 8-year delay. That was a lot of work with the NCC that the proponent was doing, change in the market demand. They chose the timing. It wasn't the city that held them up for 8 years.
So do you agree with the April 10th?
Well, if we can do it by April 10th, yes. I put April 24th, but if we get a
put April the
solution by
10th.
April 10th...
Well, but you may not have a solution, but you'll have the process. There's a difference.
I just wanted to allow enough time. There's Easter in there to allow us to make sure we get to a solution before we come back here.
And you may not, and understanding you may not get to a solution, because the city may not have the money.
Maybe the next question will be, do we reject the site plan?
Maybe that will be what it is, and then we'll go from there.
I would just rather take the time to find a solution. So I thought April 24th. The planning committee would rather deal with it on April 10th. I can amend that.
April the 10th. I'm asking staff whether they're going to be able to...
We're keeping the 24th? Okay, we're staying with the 24th.
Okay. Mr. Herwire, could you actually have meetings and have this discussion by April the 10th? Thinking about the workload that we have coming up on items that haven't...
Madam Chair, we're always open to further discussions, but I do want to emphasize that we have explored this issue extensively over the past months with Mr. Mark, Mr. Baker. Colin can speak to more detail, but I'm concerned about the expectation of a resolution on something that's been explored extensively already.
Mr. Simpson?
Madam Chair, 2 points of clarification for using development charges for reimbursement. One would that the Ontario Ministry of Transportation warrants would need to be met, which they aren't in this location. And 2, that temporary works would not be reimbursed either. So because the road is expected to be widened within the next 6 to 8 years, putting traffic lights in at this location would be in a temporary location. They'd have to be relocated as part of the widening. So for those 2 fundamental points, I don't believe they would be put into the development charge bylaw as an intersection on its own. And it's also important to note that this section of Leicester Road between Airport Parkway and Bank Street is already in the DC bylaw. It's a Phase 2 Transportation Master Plan project expected to be implemented in 2024-2026 timeframe. So that would be the time to explore intersection control measures. It would be part of the detailed design as part of this widening exercise. The environmental assessment that was completed in 2015 looked at it as well and did not anticipate the need for intersection control measures, even with the full widening. So it's staff's sense that even with delaying this, deferring it by another 2 weeks, that we would likely be no further ahead, that we would likely not put it into the DC bylaw.
Thank you for that information. Okay, where am I going next? Councillor Cloutier, you're done? Okay, now to staff. We're going to staff now. Vice Chair Tierney. So actually, just hang on. So no more questions of Mr. Page? Okay, so Danny, if you can go back in the audience. And Gary, if you can come up and take that seat, please. All right. Sorry, Vice Chair Tierney.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Phil, it's great to see you here. And you know my love of warrants. Evil words, we can't even get a stop sign put in as councillors because it has to meet a warrant. I have 2 situations on Cedarville Road that you're very familiar with. One, I'm trying to achieve the warrant with great difficulty. It's always on the edge and it fluctuates all the time. And then I have another situation where I have a developer that had built back in the day based on a target number of units to be put in. They modified their site plan during development because, again, condominiums weren't the hot rage anymore. Now they'll never hit this target and I can't get the lights in. Is this a similar situation to what Councillor Deans is talking about here?
I'm not sure I understand the question in terms. I mean, we have a warrant process for new traffic signals. Today, we've got 19 locations that meet warrants that we don't have funding for to complete. We have some intersections like the one on Cedarville you're referencing to that's in the high 90s. That's getting close to being warranted. So that's our challenge is that, we use the warrants to help us determine when those locations should be signalized. And so the challenge is, when you have a location that doesn't meet the warrants, how do you justify that being completed when you have locations that do meet warrants? And we're trying to get through those locations, but it's taking time when the average cost for these locations can range from $1.5 to $2 million.
And that brings up another great point that I wanted to check in on. But first, I want to go back to the warrants. Are they provided by the province? Here's the matrix, here's the checkbox you must go through, or are we like a modified version in our municipality?
The warrants that we use for traffic signals are established through the province of Ontario. It's what's used throughout the province. It's for consistency. It's based at looking at the risk in terms of studies were done when they were developed to determine how much traffic do you need before you start to see increases in collisions because people aren't accepting. There's not enough gaps for people to accept, and they don't want to wait for very long periods of time, and then collisions start to increase. So the numbers that were established is that threshold where if you get over that number, then you're likely to see collisions. And so that's how we use that. That was approved some 15, 20 years ago by council as the process we use to determine if signals are warranted. And once they are, then they're put in a program and they're installed based on a list of priorities. And in this case, because we have more warranted locations than we have funding to do per year, those get looked at every year and reprioritized.
Great, and I do appreciate that. And again, I just find that whole process flawed. I brought this up with the Chair of Transportation, Keith Eglin, on several occasions where I have this one intersection where there's an accident every 6 months, and it still doesn't meet the warrants. I don't understand that. But back to the development side. So the property in question is Le Gouvernement. It's a Richcraft property. They started building their units, and you're familiar, you know where I'm going on this. They said when they hit a certain unit number, they would put and pay for the light set. Is this a very similar situation to Councillor Dean's? And like I'm saying, they modified their plan. Originally, they're going to do chock-a-block condominiums and modified it to much larger footprint homes. So, of course, they're never going to hit that target. What happens in that situation?
So normally what happens for development-driven intersections, so you see them more at the malls and things like that, the developer would pay for the intersection, the traffic light to be installed. Then they would request that we do a count. If the location meets the warrants, then the city the following year takes over the maintenance and operating costs. If the location doesn't meet the warrants, then the developer still pays for those costs, or it could be transferred because I know we have a similar situation on Riverside Road where it's a condo association that now is taking over those costs. So the upfront costs are borne by the developer, and those maintenance costs are maintained by them until the location meets warrants. If we use this process in this case, based on the fact that we're at 46% and even projected up to 64% or 65% when it's fully built out, I don't see that this would ever meet the warrants for traffic lights. So the question is, would the developer be willing to pay for the operating costs, which is about $10,000 a year in perpetuity?
And so back to the questions on the costs. The projection was $250,000 for a working light set. In my area, I assume those have all gone up because I've heard the number from the applicant of $1 million. Is that to include the electrical and the future ongoings?
So just a regular traffic light. So if there was left turn lanes installed, there's no roadway modifications. Right. That's about $250,000. When you have to start putting in left turn lanes, right turn lanes, in this case it sounds like hydro has to be moved, we have to shift, then that cost goes up. I can give you, if you look at our traffic signal program, I think about 17 or 18 of the intersections require roadway modifications, and we're looking at costs anywhere between $1.5 and $3 million per location. And
what's the cost of a roundabout?
The roundabout, again, that varies. It can vary from $1 million to $2-3 million. It just depends on what's required in terms of, do you need utilities to be relocated, do you need to purchase property, and things like that.
Okay. Well, I think you know my feelings on warrants, and I'll see how the rest of this discussion goes. Thank you.
So before I go on to the next questions, I would like you to provide a list to us of the 19 intersections today that are waiting to be built and their addresses, okay? Then I also want to ask you just to clarify, you said that you can only afford 2 a year. So this reminds me of the school crossing guard, right? We all want passionately to have school crossing guards, more of them than that, yet in our budget we only have so much. Yeah, I'll put you now. So my question is, if you said that you can only afford 2 a year, so the 19 are talking 10 years from now, I'd like to know what those 19 are, and then I'd like to see the 10 below that, if you have that. You probably do, eh?
Yeah, no, that can be provided.
I'd like to see as much detail as possible on the ones that are waiting, that legitimately are waiting to be built, okay? So the next person with questions, we're back to Councillor Blais, Councillor Deans, Councillor Leeper, Councillor Cloutier, Councillor Kadri, and Councillor Hubley.
Thank you.
Not either of you two? Okay.
Thanks, Madam Chair.
Councillor Blais.
Okay. What traffic control systems do we have to facilitate pedestrian movements from one side of a street to another?
So there's the PXOs, there's multi-way stops, there's pedestrian signals, and then there's a full traffic signal. So those will be the ones.
Perfect. And so were all four of those evaluated?
I understand that the multi-way stop was evaluated, and there the warrants were about 20 or 22% because there's not a lot of side street traffic coming up. The PXO, because the road's an 80-kilometer roadway, wouldn't be something that we would recommend.
Fair enough. But I guess what Councillor Deans is asking is for a couple of weeks or a month, whatever it is, to go back and look at it. And perhaps a PXO was never considered or thought of or never came into the conversation, but a combination of a reduction to 60 and a PXO might solve the councillor's problem, the neighborhood's problem. That's $1,000 and $50,000. Even if it's a signalized PXO, it's 50 or 60 grand. That's a $70,000 solution and not $1 million solution. And maybe that takes 3 weeks to go off and figure if that's the right solution. That gets people to cross the street to the bus stop, slows traffic down, and I guess my point is, people were locked in on a traffic light. People might have been locked in on a stop sign. There are at least two other options you just mentioned that we haven't talked about at all and sounds like weren't seriously looked at because of other factors perhaps. The time to do that, like if they've been waiting 7 years and Councillor Dean says it hasn't all been for the city, 7 years, another 2 or 3, 4 weeks, like really? Go off, think about it, look at it. Councillor can decide whether she would support a speed limit reduction to accommodate for the PXO. Bang, we're done. Like, I don't know why we're putting so much effort into it when just talking about giving the councillor in office a little bit more time to see if they can work out a solution that would make sense financially and traffic-wise, and maybe consider some things that haven't been in the mix so far, because you know how this place works. Planning is siloed from transportation, which is siloed from transit. They never horizontally talk. Go off and spend a couple of weeks talking to each other. If you have a solution, great. If you don't, the councillor can decide whether she wants to try to kill the site plan or not. Like, we're spending a lot of time talking about what I think is
about 150 houses, yeah, we are. But I mean, it's been going on a long time, so I listened to what you said. And the PXO, so for example, you know the money that we get every year in our accounts, can we contribute that money to that purpose? So for example, Councillor Deans could kick in, if it was only $70,000, could she put in $50,000 in a year to help to pay for that?
I think I'd just like to say as a PXO, even if we drop the speed limits with a sign to 60, would still not be recommended here because the operating speeds would stay the same unless police were there all the time. This is a rural cross-section roadway.
The point is, Phil, that in the discussion,
PXOs on Brian Coburn. I got PXOs on Brian Coburn. We just put them in.
This is
operating
something.
Speed on Brian Coburn is 80. The traffic limit's 60, but the operating speed is definitely 80. I know because I drive it every day and I drive 80 on it. And so we put PXOs in places where we know, well, no, this is what people drive.
Okay, but can I, okay. And I have an answer to the question.
Yes.
Is for example, as you know, on Jockville Road, you hadn't done a count in 10 years. You did a count at the one intersection that doesn't have a roundabout in it. You found out that it did achieve, totally achieved, and so I asked you if I can contribute some of my money to make that happen. The answer is yes. So I think that needs to be part of the solution as well. How it's going to be paid for is not only, the solution can't only be on the fact that we're going to have somebody building 150 units. How many, I mean, just think about it, 150 units. Are you
Yes.
finished with questions? Can I go on to Councillor?
Madam Chair, just a point of clarification. You know, we did consider a PXO at this location, and we did consider a reduction in speed from 80 to 60, and you would need approximately 100 pedestrians to be crossing at this location in an 8-hour period. Currently, there's about one person. Our counts are showing about one person is crossing at this location, and even with even with a bus stop.
There's a bus stop there today.
Even with the bus stop.
So there isn't a bus stop. So part of the solution I'd like you to look at.
So that would be approximately 50 people all day.
Putting the bus stop on the side where the people are going to be living in case that number increases. Yes. Because potentially it would increase then, right? So yes. That should be part of the consideration as well if this deferral is...
we've done that work, yes.
Great. But, I mean, OC Transpo, shouldn't just be able to say no if there isn't one now. I'm asking for information to clarify, Councillor Shirelli, other things that are coming up, and that's why I'm asking for it. Okay? Do you not want to know what in case some of those are in your area? Yes, I can. Who am I going to next? Councillor Deans, and then Councillor Leeper, Councillor Cloutier, Councillor Kadri, Councillor Hubley, maybe Councillor Shirelli, and maybe Councillor Nussbaum.
Okay, thank you. First, let me just say that if we do come to a solution before April 24th, I'd be happy to give delegated authority back to staff and not trouble you with this ever again. So maybe that would be an incentive to work something out. My first question to city staff is, what is our policy on providing transit options for new developments?
I don't see anyone from OC Transpo here today, but I can help answer that. The policy is to have 95% of the urban area within 400 meters of a bus stop. That's the general policy.
So, as I understand this proposed development, the staff are requiring a bus pad on the north side. And OC Transpo, in conversation with them, are predicting about 50 new users from the 156 units that are being proposed. But city staff are rejecting a bus pad on the south side because we have no safe way of getting those transit riders across the street. So what we're left with is a situation where OC Transpo can pick up riders in the morning, but we can't get them home at night because we have nowhere to drop them off. And the best second location would be at the intersection of Albion and Leicester, a full kilometer away from this new development. And then we'd be asking these 50 riders to walk on an 80-kilometer road, a kilometer to get home where there are no sidewalks. And I just wonder, what kind of urban planning is this?
In working with OC Transpo, they have developed another route servicing plan that has the westbound bus location on Albion Road, and it would be a walk along Meandering Brook and Mass Avenue, which isn't shown on the photo on the screen above you, but there would be some local streets that would connect the new development to transit to Albion Road.
Can you point that out to me?
If we can flip back just to the, yes, so it's pretty washed out, but there's a number of streets just to the north, and there's a connecting street from Mass down to Meandering Brook. So Meandering Brook, I think, is here, and it goes up and comes over, and so there would be a connection for people to walk to transit through the community and out to Albion.
So well over a kilometer walk, and that is not our policy, correct?
You know, the policy is for 95% of the urban area to be within 400 meters of a bus stop. So I don't think it's a full kilometer. There'd be some of the units that'd be outside of that 400 limit, but I believe that the overall policy citywide would continue to be met.
Well, citywide, but I would contend that every community needs to be a safe community. We need to be able to move people effectively and safely. And we need, in a city that prides itself on building a state-of-the-art public transit system, to be building new communities that are not served by public transit in a safe way, in regard to our own policies makes no sense to me. And the whole issue there is that intersection. If we can move people across that street in a safe manner, OC Transpo can provide reasonable transit service to that community. And I actually think this is the fundamental issue here, that we should never approve a proposal like this that doesn't address our public transit ridership issues. We wonder why we're losing riders. Well, if we're building brand new communities and we can't serve them with public transit, that's no way to build a city. So I am going to be asking you to send this back, and I'm going to be asking the city and the proponent to have an open mind in finding solutions. I'm prepared to look at the PXO, I think, with flashing lights. I'm prepared to look at an all-way stop, but I understand that there's safety issues because the speed on Leicester Road. But we can never ask people to be crossing that street in an unsafe way, and we should be providing transit at the location as recommended by OC Transpo. So for that reason, and the reason that this community has the full expectation that a light is going there because they were promised a light 8 years ago, I really feel that we need to send this back and get it right. And as I said, I'd be happy to give delegated authority back to staff when a solution is found. If a solution isn't found, then I'm going to be asking this committee to reject the site plan because I don't believe this is good city planning.
Can you get to a question?
No, I'm done.
Okay. Gary, whenever you think that you're hearing that you want to jump in and talk about development charges with regard to intersections and what our health looks like, et cetera, et cetera. So be prepared for that. Councillor Leeper, and then Councillor Cloutier, Kadri-Hubli, Nussbaum. I know, I've been waiting. I keep saying it. Councillor Leeper.
Thank you. You're hearing that profound frustration among residents with the system of warrants. And those system of warrants, I'm sorry, I think you heard them say, most of our warrants are at least 10 years old. So they've been developed, before our new official plans that are, pedestrian-oriented, transit-oriented, new thinking about urban planning, new thinking in the provincial policy statement. And we're still using car-centric, driver-centric warrants. You talked about the expected operating speed of cars, so that no matter what you do, you still expect the operating speed of cars to be 80 kilometers per hour. What is the expected operating behavior of pedestrians who are going to be moving into this community? There's going to be a bus stop across the street. How do you expect them to operate? Do you expect that the operational behavior of pedestrians and people trying to get to work is going to be to walk hundreds of meters around, or do you expect them to try to cross Leicester directly?
Thank you. Just some details on the site plan, and sorry the bulb is burnt out. But internally, there's a sidewalk system for the whole neighborhood that's connecting to Leicester Road. There is AM peak bus service on the north side servicing this new development.
Right.
So they will have that safe pedestrian connectivity to the site. And as part of the conditions of approval, Vailcraft will be extending that sidewalk and installing the bus pad on the north side. It's right. The South PM service where there is no bus stop on the south side of Leicester Road right now. And as we heard, the preferred stop is a distance away that residents would have to walk through off of Leicester Road. So there is that recognition of pedestrians in this new project that they will be able to walk safely to the north side of Leicester Road for bus service.
Is that Albion?
I believe so, yes.
That is a completely unacceptable distance away if we want to get people onto transit. And what we're saying is that we can't get pedestrians safely across this street in order to provide good transit service. Is that roughly what we're saying here?
I think there's always a challenge in the context here of trying to get people on where the road is not double loaded. There's no development on the south side. We've heard that. OC Transpo works within their guidelines, and and parameters to try and achieve that desirability for convenient stops where people will encourage transit. I don't disagree with that and what Mr. Simpson had mentioned about as a citywide policy trying to achieve that 95th percentile. There are contextual challenges for sites on the urban edge, and this is one of them. And is the door closed to work with OC Transpo on finding a better route for the area? There are other neighborhoods with similar contexts where the buses always load on the north side in the AM and PM peak. And is that a solution that OC Transpo can possibly implement without the need for any signalization or other type of intervention? Those are things that a fulsome discussion with that group may bring solution to.
So let's work on that and make sure that we've actually got those solutions. Councillor Blais has suggested a number of things that we need to look at before we approve a site plan that will put hundreds of residents in a position where they have no convenient transit. We shouldn't be approving these new developments until we can assure them that we are building it according to our official plan policies of trying to encourage transit and pedestrian and other forms of alternative transit. This is just an old school subdivision in which we assume that everyone is going to drive in order to be safe, and that's not acceptable anymore. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Maybe Councillor Kadri would like to comment on the bus service Fernbank has, or 29,000 people in other areas. But your point is that as a city, no matter where the growth is, you have to be looking at this. And OC Transpo has to be willing to look at solutions as well.
Absolutely. If saying no to developments because they're not well enough served by transit is putting into question the sustainability of the city, our ability to provide. Exactly. That may be the spur we need to finally start designing transit and putting the resources into it that we need. Anyways, thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Gary, did you want to talk about DCs? Just even from the perspective of how they would be captured for what you're hearing today, and what difference that would make, and how we as a city would be able to look at payback and that sort of thing. Just even at that level, I think it's important.
Yeah, I think currently the intersection program that we have in place, the area-specific program, we don't collect any development charges inside Greenbelt for that program. It's 98% funded from outside Greenbelt collections and then 2% rural. So maybe that could be looked at in 2019 if we're going to start funding more intersection works of this type on the area-specific side of things, that there would be some mechanism to collect more funds inside Greenbelt and not have 100% basically the funds coming from outside Greenbelt. And one of the reasons why it is that way is that because most of the intersections are identified outside Greenbelt, but this particular one, we wouldn't be collecting anything for the area-specific component for intersections if you're talking about a new intersection or a roundabout. So maybe that in 2019 that could be looked at more closely to say that there should be some sort of allocation or differentiation between areas. But I think for fairness, it would seem odd that we were going to use development charges collected outside Greenbelt to fund something inside Greenbelt, from my perspective. So
it's a lot different. Okay, thank you for that. Councillor Cloutier. Yeah, because it was Councillor Liepert, yeah.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Can you, we talked about, Mr. Simpson, you said one person is crossing, and we talked about the warrants, 89%, 46%. Are these pre-construction based on existing conditions or anticipating the conditions when the 156 units have been built?
This warrant analysis is done based on anticipated trips. So currently the MTO warrant is at 49%, and with the anticipated build-out with this application, the warrant will go to 67%.
Okay, so currently 49, anticipated 67%. And a warrant has to be at 100% to justify a change?
That's correct, Councillor.
Based on a variety, okay. Can you explain a little bit to give us a little bit further assurance what may have caused the discrepancy between 89% and 46%? I know it's not directly related to the application, but just...
Well, that was a long time ago, Councillor. That was in 2010 when that count was done, and count data for applications of this purpose are normally no later than 5 years, so we would have been asked for a new updated traffic count and traffic analysis beyond just the 2010 count. So we did the counts again in 2014, twice in 2016, again in 2018, and all of those subsequent counts were done with MyoVision cameras. The count that was done in 2010 did use students to do that data collection, so there could have been some anomalies associated with that methodology that we used in 2010. But we're quite confident of where we are now in terms of what the traffic volumes are, since we've counted a number of times over the last few years, and they seem to be consistent. And that's what we're basing it on, the most recent count data.
What are the implications of installing traffic calming or traffic regulating devices such as lights or PXOs when warrants aren't met? Are there legal implications? Are there...
There's no legal implications. What we just find is that you potentially have people running red lights when they're not occurring. There's cars that are stopping when they didn't need to, so you have potential for increased collisions with rear-end collisions. So it just, and when you get to the point where the warrants are met, the likelihood of collisions are higher than those, potential consequences of having a traffic light there. So it's trying to find that balance. When you're in a location that's got very low warrants and you put a signal in there, you're more likely going to see more collisions. Today, over the last 5 years, we haven't had any collisions at this location. Putting a signal in here, you may start to see having a collision or two. So those are the things we have to look at. The warrants also assist us in terms of prioritizing where the signals go and where they should go, because we have a limited amount of money to install new traffic signals. So that all fits in within the puzzle of signalizing location. But that's not to say that if we've installed locations that don't meet warrants in the past, and if it was council's desire to put a traffic light at this point, we would put a signal here. But again, you're likely to see it being increased collisions because of the fact that now vehicles have to stop.
I've noted the answers with regard to traffic and warrants, but and I'm sorry that nobody from OC Transpo is here, but a little bit of ambiguity with regard to how we could best serve our transit users. With 156 units going in and bus service on Leicester, and the policies of OC Transpo, how much thought has been given to how we could best serve and how we could best encourage the use of transit by trying to get within the 400-meter walking?
This is pretty much off topic now. I think that there's collectively going to be support to extend the deferral. Okay, so let's get. Now you're talking about something that's more useful or better to be asked at a transit committee, because we don't have. We tried to be forward-thinking and had Phil here and had Colin here, had Gary here, have legal here, but we did not think that to bring transit. So yeah. I just think that that's out of context of this site plan application for 150 homes right now. So I would suggest that you may like to ask the question on your own during this period of time of OC Transpo, or I'm sure OC Transpo will now be part of the consideration of the discussion, correct?
Well, when we're talking about traffic and transit...
But we're talking about... We're off topic now. Okay. We've taken it beyond where any of our experts in the room can now answer something.
I recognize that. I acknowledge that at the beginning.
I can tell you that one of the staff here is trying to get somebody from transit here, but may not be successful.
Absolutely, and I'm not criticizing. I'm
not saying you are. I'm not saying that you are. I'm just saying that I don't think they can give you more on that.
Okay. Those are all my questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Kadri? Pardon? Councillor Kadri, Councillor Hubley, Councillor Nussbaum.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And just a couple of questions. If somebody can go back to that first slide where it's just a block showing it right there. Maybe, sorry, it's the one after that then. It's the sidewalk along the road coming in. Right along there. If you look at the piece of property that's dedicated to the city, the sidewalk ends at just before the corner. Am I correct in that picture? Right on the top end, where the turning lane. There's no sidewalk on the top? Looks like a sidewalk up top.
The only sidewalk is on the east side of Meandering Brook, and it terminates here. This is where the sidewalk would be extended as part of the site plan approval. It's all paved shoulders on the south side of Leicester and the north side outside of this intersection. It's a rural cross section outside of this intersection.
Okay, so that top piece is not a sidewalk at the top.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. I thought that was a sidewalk because the way it shows in the picture, it does look like a sidewalk. But anyways, coming back to the issue in terms of traffic calming and or transit for that matter, but transit, the chair's ruled that it may not be appropriate to ask those questions right now. In terms of the traffic calming measures, and I'm sure Councillor Deans has discussed that with staff, are there recommendations that the staff have put forward already on Leicester Road for traffic calming before this project even goes ahead?
You mean the temporary traffic calming?
Yes.
I'm not aware, but I can find out. I mean, the only thing I could think of on this type of road would be maybe putting a speed board, but I'm not sure if that's been looked at. I can find out and let you know.
Okay. Well, thanks for that, Mr. Landry. And my concern, as you know, you and I have talked many a time along with some of the planning staff, is that concern about the warrant system. And I know some of my colleagues and most of my colleagues have expressed their concerns about the warrant system. The public tells us over and over and over again, they live in the community, they have a concern with safety, yet we have to go back to looking at warrant system in terms of get a stop sign, get a traffic light, what have you. As you know, Mr. Landry, in my area, there's a couple of intersections that were either failing or close to failing. One of them does have a traffic light, but the intersection never got modified. So the traffic light doesn't function properly. And this intersection we're talking about is the one that leads to the Canadian Tire Centre, as an example. It's a very important intersection. And again, coming back to the warrant system, it did not meet the traffic light installation. Now, because of the money, we can't, redesign the intersection. My question to you, and maybe somebody from planning can answer that, is the continuous approval of subdivisions and site plan approvals without looking at the infrastructure, either existing infrastructure and or new infrastructure. Why are we doing that? I mean, why are we continuing to, in my case, in the Fairwinds area, there's almost 3,000 to 4,000 people living there now, and the old road, the widening of Huntmar Road, is not until at least another 5 to 7 years out. So again, coming back to this proposal, even though it may be 150 homes today, but as I asked earlier about the traffic calming, there is a concern already expressed by people living along Leicester Road, or not living along Leicester Road, but crossing it, about the traffic safety. So why have we not talked about either a traffic calming measure going in temporarily in that road, number one, and number two, the fact that if it's not safe for transit to get the, people to take transit, then why even bother having transit on that particular road or particular area? To me, the 150 homes, yeah, it's a number, but the people coming out of those residents do expect those kind of services. So I think, Madam Chair, as I suggested to you earlier, I think the deferral is in demand and in need, whether it's a 2-week or a 4-week deferral, I'll let the committee decide that. And then once that deferral is taken root, if the committee approves, and if there are no decisions made at the end of that discussion, then it's up to Councillor Dean, working with the committee to see what her next steps would be. But I'm okay with the deferral for this morning's meeting.
Thank you. Councillor Hubley? Councillor Nussbaum?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think it's clear from the discussion that we're hearing around the table that it is necessary to go back and take another look at what our options are here. One thing I want to clarify with Mr. Landry, when you answered Councillor Tierney, you said $1 million to $2 million for a roundabout, but we also have options of smaller roundabouts that are a lot cheaper. Yeah, I don't know if it would work on Leicester, but it is something we could look at, correct?
Yeah, we started installing mini roundabouts. Those are used more on the minor collector local streets. So at this intersection, that wouldn't be something we would look at. That'd be more of the regular size roundabouts.
Okay. But you have other tools under traffic calming that may already be approved or may not yet be approved, that something might be possible to work out for here if we give you a couple of weeks to take a look and present some options to the ward councillor and the developer?
Yeah, we'll go back and take a look at options.
Okay, thank you. My other question is and I think Mr. Simpson may be able to answer this. When we go off of Leicester into that division, the right in, right out, it appears that there's a road. Can you bring that picture back up with the units in it? The plan, the section. Thanks. So we would come in at the top there off the right in, right out. Is it possible to bring, is this road built that we could bring a bus in there and then come down that road and come back out? So that would address the whole issue of transit users. It's possible.
Thank you for the question. That's something we actually did discuss with OC Transpo in our many meetings. The program for this development is that would ultimately become a private street. So there are issues with bringing OC Transpo buses onto private streets. As well, the cross-section for a private street is typically narrower. So the design of the road itself may not accommodate a bus, and I'm not aware of examples where we bring OC Transpo buses onto a private road extensively for service. But we did look at that question. And right now, currently, it's not designed for a bus to enter the site.
So it's not wide enough now, but it's not built yet either.
Correct, it's not built yet.
Okay, so that's something that could go into this review, that might be, because if they want to make private roads in there, every single road doesn't have to be private, correct? If it's the full road could be public, possible?
My understanding is it would be a significant redesign and a different process to create public roads. This is being developed as a planned unit development, which typically has a 6-meter cross-section, and it is a private road. And there'd be a private roadway agreement between developer X and the city. So we have certainly not asked for this to be a public road, and to go to a full municipal cross-section standard would be a significant redesign to Vailcraft.
Okay. Okay, thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Our last speaker, and you might as well tie it in for deferral, because that's the motion that's going to be before us, not the actual agenda item, which was the Planning Committee approve a site plan control application. So if you could speak to that, that would be refreshing. Thank you.
Okay, great, thanks. Yeah, and initially I thought we were spending a long time on one small application, but actually the discussion's been very useful. And I think some of the ideas around alternate ways of facilitating safe crossing is critical. I told Councillor Deans earlier, to me, that's the main issue. I wouldn't argue for the installation of a signalized intersection in light of the warrants, but there are other elements of the story that I do think merit a second look, and I do think it is perverse to think that we wouldn't provide transit service for a community on the basis of not having safe access to cross that street. No one in this room, I think we would all agree with that. It doesn't make any sense at all. So I do think in this case, maybe this is an example to do a pilot. Maybe we need to think thoughtfully about how we do that. The one question, and I won't spend too much time on the transportation side, but Phil, you mentioned, looking at PXO, you sometimes look at warrants and the number of people crossing the street. And my only worry there is you've heard the expression, it's hard to justify a bridge by the number of people swimming across the river. And it's a little bit the same with PXOs. You've never heard that? Yeah. So, I do think Councillor Leeper raised some important points that it probably is time. Warrants may make sense for signalized intersections, but they probably don't make sense for other forms of transportation infrastructure like PXOs. If you can imagine that people will start using them, people will start crossing the street if they were there, but they're now not doing that. So, Madam Chair, I'll support the deferral on the basis of my real interest here is to really encourage staff to come up with a thoughtful way of allowing the people to cross the street. I'm partial to the roundabout option. It actually helps reduce speed along that stretch. I know staff are doing a great job putting PXOs on either side of roundabouts. So it strikes me that you might be able to kill a number of birds with one stone in that way, if there's a way of doing that. But I do think this question of how do we encourage alternate modes of transportation, particularly in the outlying areas, is a critical one, and one that's going to motivate me to vote in favor of the deferral motion. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. And I think this is I don't even know who would answer the question anymore, but do we have the legal authority to force somebody to pay for a PXO? Has that ever come up?
I believe that we don't have that kind of authority to request things that are unwarranted, including PXOs.
And when you were talking about the warrants and how they're set by no one else is on the list, so I'm allowed to ask questions. Ask questions now, Councillor Chiarelli, just for your record. So when you said the province actually sets the warrants and they're generally used across the province, is part of that reason to take it out of the hands of the elected officials, to give it more of a level playing field, so it's about safety, and as opposed to, like somebody said, why don't we just let them put a four-way stop there? I'm sure that Vailcraft sitting there would go ahead, fill your boots. I mean, what are we talking, the cost of a couple of signs? What would you have to say to that?
Well, the warrants are used so that we can ensure that the appropriate control is used at the appropriate intersection. If we didn't have warrants, then every time we asked for a traffic light, we'd have about, 4,000, 5,000, 6,000 traffic lights because everybody wants them. And that becomes very problematic. I mean, we have.
And who would pay for, how would that be paid for?
Well, that's another question, because we don't have enough money today to pay for the traffic lights that are warranted. So the challenge becomes, as you put more of these controls, we're seeing these with multi-way stops, where there's, lots of multi-way stops in communities, and people aren't stopping. So now we're trying to fix a problem where the stop sign probably shouldn't have been there in the first place. I think it goes back to the bigger pictures. How do we design our roads so that we don't need to be putting multi-way stops everywhere? Mm-hmm. We've started with the many roundabouts. So through building better suburbs, we're looking at designing the community so that we're not here sitting trying to figure something out because a road's not working like it should be. A new subdivision shouldn't be built, and within 2 weeks, we're out there trying to fix a traffic problem. So those are the kind of tools that we're doing moving forward. It's a challenge with existing roads. We've got programs. We piloted a mini roundabout in Councillor Hubely's ward, and it was very successful because we could put it in there, and we'll be looking at, it's a new tool that we use, and we'll be using it in other areas. Yeah. So that going back to your question about warrants, it's there so that we can ensure that the road operates as safe as possible. If you put too many of a certain device, it reduces the safety. If you don't have enough, that's a problem too. So it's sort of that benchmark in terms of identifying when you need to make a change to the operation of that intersection.
Yeah, so does anybody know if, and I think maybe Councillor Blais would know actually, if the part of the solution that this committee sought was to tell OC Transpo to put their new stop on the north side of Leicester, what would a process be for that?
Well, Pat Scrimsher's shop does the routes. Yeah. Generally, though, and you know this, in suburban communities, the directions are typically reversed from AM to PM. So if you're getting on the bus on the north side of the street in the AM, you're typically getting off the bus on the south side in the PM, just because it's easier to reverse the route than to drive all deadhead across the neighborhood to the beginning point of the route, to then drive through the route to drop people off. People want to get off as soon as they can, right? So typically bus routes are just reversed. Yeah, it would be more difficult to do a loop. One direction you normally have to cross the street, right?
So in this case, it's like the chicken, the adage, another adage, why did the chicken cross the street? In this case, there's only one reason, and that's because OC Trans was putting a bus stop there. Because NCC is not going to develop that land, right? And unless there's the Maire Bleu trails and stuff through there, there's not going to be chickens crossing the street to get to the other side of a 4-lane road. Okay, so we have a motion. Yes?
So we have a motion. I haven't read it. If you want me to read it, I will. I've just made a minor amendment to it.
Is this the one that was introduced by Councillor Blais?
Correct.
Okay, what's your minor amendment?
So, therefore, be it resolved that Planning Committee defer the vote on 195 Meandering Brook until April 24th meeting and direct planning staff to work with the developer, and I've just added, and the ward councillor, during that time to explore any and all options to find solutions to the traffic and transit problems outlined above.
Sure. Well, that doesn't change. I think that was presumed. Yeah. All right. So on the deferral motions, are carried? Yes, carried. Okay. So you've heard all of the input, questions, etc., directions. So I think we need a whole bunch of information so that we have a real bird's eye view of this one. Okay. Thank you. All right. Any? Can I just ask a question of legal? Is legal still here? Is there this site plan that has been before us for 8 years? Is there any ability for it to be taken to the OMB? Appealed? Sorry.
Yes, Madam Chair. My understanding is that this application has been in since 2010, and that the proponent has been meeting with staff and the community to try and find a resolution, but they do have the ability to appeal this matter after 30 days of submission of their site plan application to the Ontario Municipal Board.
Okay. I mean, they've never said that they were going to. I'm just asking what the process.
And it's my understanding, Madam Chair, that they haven't, but that is a right that is open to them.
Okay. Thank you. Any other business? Any inquiries? Notices of motion? Okay. So our next meeting is Tuesday, April the 10th. Thank you.